March 12, 1946, Budapest. Inside the courtyard of Markó Street Prison, the air is thick and stagnant. A dense crowd presses against the stone walls. Photographers adjust their lenses. Soldiers stand at attention with fixed bayonets. The clock reaches 1524. Ferenc Szálasi, leader of the Arrow Cross Party and the final fascist head of state in Hungary, walks toward the gallows. It is a simple wooden beam. A single hemp rope hangs from the top. He stops. He kisses a small wooden crucifix and receives the final sacraments from a priest. But a blessing cannot change the past. 70,000 people died under his direct command. Their bodies were dumped into the freezing waters of the Danube. How does one man carry the weight of 70,000 murders? Many wondered if he felt any remorse, but the footage shows only a cold, mask-like face. Stay until the end to hear the final words of Szálasi. You will understand how the most beautiful river in Europe was transformed into a mass Jewish cemetery. This is the moment of reckoning. The story begins with the roots of evil. 1935. Hungary is a nation scarred by the First World War. Economic collapse creates a vacuum. In this void, Ferenc Szálasi finds his voice. He is not a career politician, he is a former officer of the General Staff. He speaks of Hungarism. He promises order. He promises a pure nation. The crowds begin to grow. People listen to his speeches in town squares. He moves with military precision. He looks into the cameras with an unblinking gaze. He forms the Arrow Cross Party. Their symbol is a cross with arrowheads modeled after the swastika. The government tries to stop him. They arrest him in 1938. They put him behind bars for 3 years. But prison only makes him a martyr. His followers do not disappear. They wait in the shadows. They print illegal pamphlets. They recruit in the barracks and the factories. Then comes 1944. Germany occupies Hungary. Hitler needs a puppet. He needs someone who will not hesitate to kill. He chooses Szálasi. The coup is fast. Armed Arrow Cross members take over the streets of Budapest. They occupy the radio station and the government buildings. The sound of boots on pavement echoes through the night. The terror begins immediately. This was not a mistake. It was a plan. There was no turning back. January 6, 1897. Kassa, Slovakia. Ferenc Szálasi is born into the fractured landscape of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was the son of a career soldier with Armenian and Hungarian blood. From his first step, Szálasi existed within a world of rigid military drills and nationalist fever. Ethnic tension filled the air of his childhood home. He developed a specific obsession early on. The boy spent hours hunched over desks, redrawing regional maps. He manually stretched the Hungarian borders far beyond their actual limits. In his sketches, he created a private world. It was an imperial nation, strong and ethnically pure. Faith was a foundation. Szálasi later wrote that belief in God was fed to him like his mother's milk. He was raised in a strict Catholic environment, but this religion did not lead to mercy or humble service. In Szálasi's hands, the cross became a weapon. He used dogma to justify exclusion and mass violence. It was a distorted theology built for brutality. 1914. The First World War begins. Szálasi did not hesitate. He joined the Austro-Hungarian army and moved immediately to the front lines. His record was spotless. He showed iron discipline and total loyalty to the emperor. He rose through the ranks to become an officer. The high command noticed him. They awarded him the Order of the Iron Crown, 3rd class. It was one of the highest imperial honors available. But personal glory could not stop the rot. November 11, 1918. The armistice is signed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses into pieces. For Szálasi, this was not just a ceasefire. It was the death of his entire reality. The old order, which he believed represented Hungarian greatness, vanished overnight. The humiliation became permanent in 1920. The Treaty of Trianon was signed. The results were catastrophic for the nation. Hungary lost 72% of its total landmass. 10 of its largest cities were cut in half or handed over to neighbors. The country lost every single one of its precious metal mines. It lost all access to the sea. The map had changed. Hungary was now a landlocked remnant of a fallen giant. Szálasi watched as the borders he once drew by hand were erased by foreign powers. The trauma was deep. The resentment was total. There was no turning back. 20.9 million people. That was the population before the treaty. Afterward, only 7.6 million remained. More than 3 million ethnic Hungarians suddenly lived on foreign soil. They were cut off by new borders. For Szálasi, this was not a diplomatic loss, it was a national mutilation. He saw it as a historical injustice. He believed it required a solution by any means necessary. During the 1920s, he stayed in the Hungarian armed forces. He wore the uniform. He followed orders. But his mind moved toward radical ideas. He studied maps of lost territories. He memorized the names of ceded cities. 1930, Szálasi joined the League of Hungarian Life. This was a secret organization. It consisted of military officers, nobles, and extreme nationalists. Their ideology was proto-fascist. The goal was clear. They wanted to restore the glory of a superior race. To them, Hungarians were the natural allies of the Germans. At first glance, he was a professional soldier, but in reality, he was becoming a political fanatic. Szálasi began writing. He produced a constant stream of ideological pamphlets. These documents were filled with ultranationalist rhetoric. He used pseudo-scientific concepts. He printed thousands of pages of ethnic hatred. His ideas were a mix of three things: Italian fascism, German National Socialism, medieval Christian mysticism. But Szálasi went further. He created his own doctrine. He called it Hungarism. Events accelerated. A central part of this ideology was Semitism. Szálasi coined this term himself. He wanted to give classic anti-Semitism a scientific appearance. Semitism did not call for the immediate destruction of Jews. Instead, it labeled them incompatible with European society. It was a strategic shift. The footage from the era shows his followers. They are disciplined, they wear armbands, they listen to his speeches in total silence. He attempted to turn prejudice into a state policy. He turned exclusion into an inevitable fate. He made hatred the moral foundation of his movement. He did not just write, he organized. He gathered supporters in dark rooms and military barracks. There was no turning back. Thus, the foundation for the coming terror was laid. Genocide disguised as philosophy. Ferenc Szálasi was only getting started. March 1939. Europe stood on the edge of a total collapse. At this moment, Szálasi formalized his political creation. He founded the National Socialist Arrow Cross Party. In Hungary, this name became a synonym for absolute terror. The beast had found its pack. The party followed a specific blueprint. It mirrored the totalitarian models of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. This was not a standard political organization. It functioned like a cult. Members wore dark green uniforms. They performed the Hitler salute. Their ideology was a toxic mix of Christian mysticism and racist anti-Semitism. They preached the cult of the leader and the dream of a dominant ethnic Hungary. The parliamentary elections of 1939 changed everything. The Arrow Cross shocked the nation. They secured 15% of the total vote. This gave them 29 seats in parliament. It was not a majority, but it was enough to legitimize radical violence. Szálasi moved from the margins to the national stage. Hungarian democracy was failing. Totalitarianism moved into the empty space. Many chose to look away. The alliance with Berlin began to pay off. Hitler backed the Hungarian territorial claims. The country regained lands lost after the Treaty of Trianon. They took southern Slovakia and subcarpathian Rus. They occupied parts of northern Transylvania and the Bačka region from Yugoslavia. Each conquest increased popular support, but it also pulled the country deeper into the destructive logic of the Axis. November 1940. Hungary officially joined the Tripartite Pact. The horrors followed quickly. The summer of 1941 marked a turning point. Hungarian authorities rounded up 20,000 Jews in the newly annexed Subcarpathian Rus. They deported them to Kamenets-Podolsky in occupied Ukraine. The footage from the era shows the reality. Families packed into cattle cars, soldiers pushing people with bayonets. Many victims were refugees or stateless persons. They had no documents, they had no protection, they had no rights. The massacre that followed was a signal of what was to come. There was no turning back. Thus, the mechanism of death began to turn. The Einsatzgruppen performed the executions. These mobile Nazi killing squads moved from village to village, leaving no survivors. January 1942 arrived. The tragedy repeated itself on Yugoslavian soil. In the city of Novi Sad, the killers were not German. Hungarian troops carried out the massacre. They murdered 3,000 Jews and Serbs during a brutal military action. History calls it the Winter Raid. Soldiers forced victims onto the frozen Danube River. They broke the ice with shells. People drowned in the freezing water. But institutional resistance still existed. Prime Minister Miklos Kalay held power. He was a conservative and a nationalist. Despite this, he refused to hand over Hungarian Jews to German authorities. It was a calculated risk, a gesture of courage, though it had clear limits. Kalay tried to balance between Berlin and his own conscience. Where was Ferenc Szálasi during this time? The footage shows his cell. He sat in prison, detained for subversive activities against the state. But prison did not break him. He refined his plans. He waited, silent, fanatical. He remained convinced that his moment was approaching. Why did the situation collapse? It seemed Hungary was a safe haven, but Hitler was watching. March 19, 1944. German troops crossed the border and occupied Hungary. Adolf Hitler feared a betrayal. He suspected the country would sign an armisticio with the Allies. He decided to act first. Admiral Miklos Horthy remained as a figurehead regent, but the Germans removed Kalay from office. They installed Tom Stoje in his place. Stoje was a pro-German diplomat. He immediately legalized the Arrow Cross Party. The Hungarian government now aligned perfectly with the genocidal policies of the Third Reich. Then came the fatal blow, May 15, 1944. One of the fastest and most efficient operations of the Holocaust began on this date. The logistics were precise. In just 8 weeks, 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported. They moved them in 145 separate trains. The destination was Auschwitz-Birkenau. Most did not survive the first 24 hours. They died in the gas chambers. The machinery of death operated with industrial precision under the commands of Rudolf Höss and Joseph Mengele. Guards ushered thousands toward the showers. Within minutes, they were gone. In July, Horthy felt the pressure. International leaders sent warnings. The horrors were too large to hide. Horthy ordered the suspension of all deportations. But the numbers tell the story. Hundreds of thousands were already dead. There was no mistake. The worst was still ahead. Ferenc Szálasi, the fanatic and prophet of hate, was waiting for his turn. When he finally reached power, Hungary plunged into total darkness. The era of the Arrow Cross had begun. October 15, 1944. The Hungarian national radio broadcasts a message that shocks the nation. Regent Miklos Horthy speaks to the people. He announces a sudden armistice with the Soviet Union. It was a desperate gamble to exit the war. Horthy wanted to save Hungary from total destruction and protect its remaining sovereignty. But Horthy made a mistake. He underestimated Adolf Hitler. He did not realize how far the Führer would go to prevent a betrayal. The German response was immediate. Operation Panzerfaust began. At the head of the mission was a name feared across the continent, Otto Skorzeny. This was the same SS officer who had extracted Mussolini from Allied hands. Now, his objective was even more daring. He had to topple the Hungarian head of state. Action followed within hours. SS commandos stormed Budapest. The footage from the time shows soldiers moving through the streets. The city is occupied without a formal warning. There is no organized resistance. But the Germans had a more brutal card to play. Skorzeny's men kidnapped Miklos Horthy Jr. He was the regent's own son. They rolled him into a carpet and tied it shut. The soldiers carried him out of the building like a sack of potatoes. They drove him directly to Budapest airport. His destination was Nazi Germany. He was now a hostage of the Reich. The message to Horthy was clear. One day later, a new regime was born, the Government of National Unity. It was a farce managed by Berlin, a puppet state serving the Third Reich. November 4th, 1944. Ferenc Szálasi is officially sworn in. The ceremony is filled with fanaticism and pomp. He takes the title of leader of the nation. His cabinet consists of 16 ministers. Half of them are members of the Arrow Cross Party. These men were not chosen for their skills. They were chosen for their loyalty to the cause. Szálasi was a messianic ideologue. He dreamed of a Hungary that was racially pure and militarily dominant. Now, he held absolute power in his hands. This power was granted by Nazi bayonets. It was sustained by pure terror. Budapest changed overnight. It was no longer just a capital city under siege. It became a site of mass executions and ruins. Szálasi was prepared to lead the nation into the abyss. He would follow his ideology to the very end. The reign of terror had begun. January 1945. The Soviet army approached the outskirts of Budapest. Hungary was collapsing into total chaos. Ferenc Szálasi made a final decision. He decided to drag the entire nation into the rubble with him. This decision sealed the fate of tens of thousands of people. Szálasi ordered the immediate confinement of all remaining Jews in the capital. He created a walled ghetto. It was a cramped space with no heating and no medicine. The footage from that time shows the reality. People lived in corridors. Families slept on freezing concrete. The result was immediate. Children died of cold on the sidewalks. The elderly died of starvation in overcrowded hallways. Typhus and other epidemics spread through the rooms like fire. But this was only the beginning of the slaughter. Between November and December, the violence moved to the streets. Thousands of Jews were dragged from the ghetto. They were forced to march toward the Austrian border. They walked on foot. They had no winter clothes. They had no food supplies. Who guarded the columns? Not the Germans. Hungarian soldiers held the rifles. This was the Hungarian state exterminating its own citizens. It was a systematic purge. The march was a death sentence. Many became too weak to walk. They fell into the snow. The soldiers did not help them. They killed them on the spot. Some took a bullet to the back of the head. Others died from a rifle butt to the skull. The bodies remained behind, frozen to the road. Ferenc Szálasi, a Christian worker at a nursing home, witnessed the brutality. He saw the elderly and the terminally ill executed. He saw children killed. Later, searchers found the bodies of 2 small boys. They were still clutching their mother. All 3 were dead. The horror intensified as January arrived. The Arrow Cross Party began removing large groups from the ghetto. Over several weeks, they took 20,000 people. The destination was the banks of the Danube River. How did they do it? They executed civilians systematically, but they wanted to save money. They looked for ways to economize on ammunition. This led to a calculated cruelty. Soldiers used rolls of barbed wire. They tied 3 people together, side by side. One soldier would fire a single shot into the person in the middle. As that body fell, its weight dragged the other 2 living people into the water. They drowned in the freezing depths, chained to a corpse. The Danube became a massive open-air cemetery. In that section of Budapest, the water changed. It was no longer a symbol of the city. Locals began calling it the Jewish cemetery. But the violence did not stop at the riverbanks. Events accelerated. This was not the final act of terror. January 14th, 1945. 11 o'clock in the morning. Inside the Daniel Barreau Hospital, Ferenc Szálasi witnesses the beginning of a massacre. Armed soldiers storm the building. They move through the wards shouting orders. Every patient capable of standing is forced out of bed. These people are marched into the courtyard at gunpoint. They are divided into small groups. The soldiers take positions behind them. Rounds from submachine guns hit the victims in the backs and the napes of their necks. Those unable to walk do not escape. They are shot directly in their hospital beds. The smell of gunpowder fills the sterilized halls. 130 people are murdered in 2 hours. The footage of the aftermath is grim. Children are executed while still in their mother's arms. Elderly patients are suffocated under their own bedsheets. Doctors and nurses attempt to block the path of the killers. They are gunned down alongside their patients. 5 days pass. January 19th. The green shirts arrive at a nursing home. Joxa records the events. The soldiers separate the men from the women. They select 70 women. Most are over the age of 71. They are marched to the nearby Varus Major Park. The soldiers follow their orders with precision. They do not use bullets this time. They throw 3 grenades into the center of the group. The explosions tear through the crowd. Clothing catches fire. The victims suffer from burns while the winter air freezes their wounds. The cold and the fire finish the work. Did the leadership intervene? No. Ferenc Szálasi never ordered a halt to the killings. His only concern was the international image of the regime. He worried about the reports from Swedish, Swiss, Spanish, and Vatican diplomats. Public executions looked unprofessional. National Police Commissioner Paul Horthy summarized the logic of the state. He did not object to the killings, he objected to the visibility. He stated that the problem was not that Jews were being murdered, but the method being used. The bodies had to disappear. They could not be left rotting in the streets. It was the bureaucratization of genocide. Death became a matter of public relations. At the same time, others acted. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg risked his life. He issued fake passports and created protected houses. He operated in the shadows. Men like Karl Lutz, Giorgio Perlasca, and Angel Sans-Brise did the same. A strange paradox emerged. The Szálasi regime began to accept these forged diplomatic documents. Even the Germans objected to the validity of the papers, but the regime ignored the protests. This was not an act of humanity. It was a calculated move for political survival. November 19th, 1944. This date marked the beginning of the end for Ferenc Szálasi. Behind his fanaticism lay a cold political calculation. Every move was a strategy. But the strategy was failing. The remnants of Hungary crossed the point of no return. Soviet forces moved in a full-scale offensive. Their Romanian allies joined the push. Together, they launched the final encirclement of the capital. Budapest was the target. It was the political, cultural, and symbolic heart of the nation. Now, it was a trap. The winter of 1944 arrived with ferocity. Temperatures dropped. The city was already exhausted by years of total war. Constant aerial bombardments had leveled entire blocks. Food supplies vanished. Fear and repression became the only laws. Why did the city not surrender? At first glance, a strategic defense, but in reality, a suicide pact. Szálasi demanded total resistance. 102 days of uninterrupted combat followed. It became one of the longest and most destructive urban battles of the Second World War. The statistics were grim. Almost 1 million civilians were trapped inside the city limits. There were no humanitarian corridors. No tregua was offered. Hope did not exist. The footage from the time shows the reality. German Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops dug into the ruins. Hungarian units loyal to the Arrow Cross joined them. They didn't just fight in the streets. They entrenched themselves in churches, schools, and historic government buildings. They moved into subway stations and even hospitals. Monuments became fortificações. The city turned into a massive graveyard of concrete and steel. Every floor of every building had to be cleared with grenades and flamethrowers. The sound of heavy artillery was constant. The smell of sulfur and rotting masonry filled the air. Events accelerated. The Soviet ring tightened around the districts of Buda and Pest. There was no way out. The Hungarian leadership watched from bunkers as the capital burned. They saw the end coming, but they refused to stop. The battle for Budapest was no longer about victory. It was about delay. Every day the city held was a day bought with thousands of lives. Thus began the final collapse.